Hello. Morning. How are you?
Just need
All right.
a few minutes to get going here.
All right.
Gotta get the dogs out.
All right. Hello, Vidhi.
Hi, how are you?
All right. Good. Hi.
Yes.
So, did you have any updates you'd like to share with us, or?
No, nothing really. So today we had college and we held a ML marathon for our juniors. That's it, yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, apart from that, I texted you about the Microsoft research internship. So I'm just gonna apply, and yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah, go ahead and apply, and I'll be happy to write your letter when they request it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it looks like Sarrah will be
Yeah.
joining us. Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke to her last week. I think about like she had gone to Germany, right? And
Yeah, for the Mentor Summit.
yeah.
Hello, Jesse.
Also,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, I was just going through I remember I asked you about the like how I can continue working in oral. So I haven't yet completely had a look at what you said. Like you sent me a link about representational brains and phenotypes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still having a look at it. Yeah.
Okay. That's
Do
good.
you mind if I add like about oral in my resume? Like I've already mentioned GSoC in my resume, but apart from that, if I separately add about the orthogonal lab, is it fine?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's usually, if you have experience at the lab, I mean, it's kind of beyond GSoC now, so yeah, it would be fine.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Hello, Jesse. How are you? All right. So yeah, I guess Sarrah contacted. Okay. Sarrah, I guess posted in the Slack that she would be wanting to present today. I don't know. She's probably getting online, so we'll try to do that. Um, and then I have some things I want to talk about. And then of course we'll have our usual discussions. But I wanted to kind of go over this week or what we've been doing recently. So this week, of course, I had the DevaWorm meeting, and that was Leylith gave a present. He was one of our GSoC scholars. He gave a presentation on his spatiotemporal lineage idea, which he's now turning into a paper. So going over like a lot of the technical details of what that's going to look like. We also talked about pseudoembryos and how people are taking gastroloids and building model embryos or models of embryos out of them. So being able to replicate spatial restriction and other gene expression patterns of mammalian embryos in gastroloids. This is interesting work. And that's something we covered. And then for the Active Inference Institute Symposium is coming up in I think 2 weeks. It's the 13th through the 16th or something like that. So that's something that you'll want to sign up for. And I have put a sign up link in the general channel for people to sign up at. If you want to attend the Zoom session that they have, you need to sign up. Otherwise, there is probably going to be a live YouTube stream so you can watch it there too. But, you might want to join the Zoom channel. Okay, so we've had a number of interesting things pop up in the Slack. The first thing is this article that Hussein posted in the Slack. So this is, I guess, some sort of Substack article by Eric Giiliam, and this is on engineering innovation. How did places like Bell Labs know how to ask the right questions? And an alternate form of this title is why all applied research organizations should hire a Bell-style systems engineer. So if you recall your history, Bell Labs was set up as part of the United States Bell Service, which was the phone monopoly that existed in the early to mid to late 20th century. And so there were a lot of people who worked there who turned out a lot of prolific work, chief among them being Claude Shannon, who developed information theory, developed a number of animal-like robots, and did juggling and studied juggling, and things like that. So he was very prolific, but the whole environment there was really a place where a company had a lot of money and they had a lab and they would fund the lab, and they'd be very generous with their funding, and then the people who they hired would sit there and think about problems and come up with, write papers and develop applications. So it was, they didn't really have to go for their own funding. They just had their, everything funded, and they were able to get their work accomplished unimpeded. So, but what this is saying is that there's this set of skills that, a Bell-style systems engineer that kind of magically appear in people, which, I guess right away from the title, my skepticism is that if you don't have the environment, how do you have the Bell-style systems engineer? Because as you know, Bell Labs is no more, and we haven't really had a true replacement for Bell Labs. We have other corporate labs where people do information research and other things like that, but we don't really have a Bell Labs anymore. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to say a Bell-style systems engineer when maybe what you really mean is an interdisciplinary systems engineer or something like that. And then the question is, where would they come from? Do we need that environment to replicate that type of person, or can we get that from just people, going to interdisciplinary programs and coming from other places and then, putting themselves out on the market? So that's kind of where this article is coming from. So it starts off, many new science orgs are looking to pursue research that has the positive aspects of both applied research and basic research. So this is kind of the distinction that a lot of research units make. They're either doing applied research or basic research, and balancing both of them is sort of important for this kind of style of systems engineer. It's something that Claude Shannon did quite well. But again, this is something that in the modern era is kind of lost, because people are kind of, the culture of the modern day world is, choosing one or the other. To me, this is a very reasonable approach. After all, the applied versus basic research distinction has always been a rather arbitrary one. And again, it's arbitrary because usually, if you're an engineer especially, you're kind of doing a lot of applications, but oftentimes you have to engage in basic research, and they don't really call it that necessarily, but you do that. And every engineering paper usually have like a section where you have to derive a proof or put some equations down to state your assumptions and things like that. So that's pure research, or basic research in a sense. If you're doing bioengineering, you might have to do a lot of basic research to get to the point where you can build an engineered, an applied thing, an applied artifact. Some research projects feel like they're squarely in one bucket or another, but it's not always that clear. Applied research is meant to be research with immediate applications in mind. But of course, applied research could stumble upon something that leads to a fundamental insight. Basic research is meant to be curiosity-driven research without immediate applications in mind, which is a decent definition. I would add that basic research is about things that don't, are agnostic to application. So basic research isn't, it's driven by curiosity in the sense that you have to kind of come up with a question and test that idea, as opposed to having something there as it's kind of like a toolbox or a package and then applying it to a problem. It's just a different mindset. And it's actually necessary for the killer applications, but it's not part of the same research pipeline. But of course, it could quickly lead to a killer application. In the universe of possible courses of research, there exist many questions that in the end will satisfy the spirit of both applied and basic research. The natural follow-up question is finding this subset of golden problems really feasible? Which is kind of, if you could find research problems that involved both basic and applied domains, could you find those problems? I mean, you can find, peer research problems that are interesting and that have, give a good result, but they're not very interesting from an applied standpoint because you can't really apply it to any kind of technology, at least one that exists today. And the same thing holds true for applications. Sometimes applications are trivial to someone who wants to, is more interested in knowledge production and things like that. And only there's this small area of problems that kind of cover both. And so, the idea is that if you want someone who's both good at basic problem solving and applied problem solving, they have to kind of engage with these problems to gain that skill set. One's knee-jerk reaction might be that it is not replicable in any kind of systematic way. It is a matter of unreliable personal taste. The history tells a different story. The mid-20th century's great American R&D labs show us that selecting profitable courses of research that satisfy the spirit of basic research has been done at a high level with large research organizations over the course of several decades. And so in this piece, he dives into Bell Labs, how Bell Labs ensured that their researchers are working on the right problems. And so this is part of a series examining where modern and applied research labs can learn from the great dragons of industrial research and development. Places like Bell Labs, GE Research, and DuPont Research and Development. So this is, I don't know if DuPont Labs still exists. I don't know if I don't think GE Research Labs exists in the same form. But, the culture that they had at that time is what he's interested in. So these institutions were, storied at the time. They had Nobel Prize winners in their research directory. And they were also profitable entities. So they were able to take their innovations and sell them on the market. So you had these applications that could be sold for profit, but you also had these basic research questions that were being answered that then fed into that pipeline to produce more applied research that could be marketed. And so that's kind of the idea. They had their differences, but they all stumbled upon many aspects of managing their research operations that were rather similar. The managers of these organizations and other researchers at the time often felt the management decisions they made were common sense rather than some great discovery. However, these common sense decisions are things we often don't do today, but almost certainly should. Okay. So, continuing, Bell Labs has become legendary in many tech circles. There's no secret why. Famous ideas like information theory, communication satellites, solar batteries, transistors, and countless other communications-related innovations trace their origins back to Bell Labs in one way or another. Idolizing Bell Labs for its outcomes is very fair because its outcomes were extraordinary. In recent years, many have begun to idolize Bell Labs for its processes, and there's nothing conceptually wrong with that. If a place has consistently fantastic outcomes and seems to have some secret sauce that is super additive to the productivity of its researchers, why would we not seek to replicate it? I find this paragraph interesting. We think about like how innovation proceeds and how to model, innovation. This might be kind of a key to doing that. So, thinking about Bell Labs for a minute. if you can think about the process by which people do their research in Bell Labs, if you can break that down into like a workflow or a set of workflows, it'd be very. I don't know if anyone's done that like in a formal way, but that would be kind of interesting to do. And then have this sort of how do you get what he calls super additive productivity. So that means that you have productivity that where if you combine different steps or different things that you do in your research process, that you get greater than an additive outcome, basically some sort of multiplicative or emergent outcome of that process. So if I do some basic research and then the same team is doing the applied research, they have some advantage, intellectual advantage over a team that would just take the basic research out of the literature, pluck it out, and apply something to, try to create an application from a set of findings. So that's kind of where it would be interesting to see if we could model that in some way and get interesting insights out of it. The issue is that many who idolize Bell's processes seem to fundamentally misunderstand how the operation worked. The most notable misconception is that many put Bell forward as a poster child of how idle curiosity and the purest kind of basic research can have a role in industry. Looking at the historical sources, that's not exactly an accurate takeaway. So Bell did a lot of astonishing basic research, but its research, while basic for an applied R&D lab, was not nearly as free as many imagine. Or rather, it was embodied in a different kind of freedom. Equating the freedom of a fine hall mathematician at the Princeton Institute of Advanced Study and a physicist at Bell Labs in the 1950s is not really an accurate way of looking at it. So Bell is an industrial R&D lab. To an industrial R&D lab, the mission is everything. Frank Jewett, the founding director of Bell Labs, once said that his new industrial R&D lab was to be, and this is a quote, an instrument capable of avoiding many of the mistakes of a blind cut and try experimentation. So this is where, in a lot of peer research, we will kind of think about a problem and then try to fashion a set of experiments to test our idea. And so, this is kind of the way we usually do things. And we just kind of figure out what works and what doesn't, and then get to, some experimental design that kind of shows how this works, that shows the sort of the effect. It is likewise an instrument which can bring to bear an aggregate or creative force of any particular problem, which is infinitely greater than any force which can be conceived of as residing in the intellectual capacity of an individual. Okay, so the focus on applications leading the research is not one that faded over the course of Bell Labs' lifetime. John Pierce, his 35-year career, he was there from 1936 to 1971. He was there for most of the existence of Bell Labs, said this of what made Bell Labs a success. This is again a quote. Someone depended on them for something and was anxious to get it. They were really needed and they rose to the need. So this is kind of where you had entities, you had, people who had an interest in solving a problem, and they came to Bell Labs to solve that problem, and then there was an interest in, taking that application and making it successful. People who see Bell Labs as a bastion of freedom in private sector research are entirely mistaken. Bell was a pretty damn free for a private sector lab. It's just that it was a balancing act. So in the Bell Labs, there were these young Turks, which are usually people who want to change things, younger people, and this is Jim Fisk. So Jim Fisk, along with Pierce, this is John Pierce, who helped shepherd it in its famous balance of deep research with careful problem selection, said the following of Bell's philosophy on problem selection when he managed Bell Labs, or when he was managing it. So this is another quote. Our fundamental belief is that there is no difference between good science and good science relative to our business. So, you have good science practices, you make it relative to your business, but you don't compromise that, good science is good science. Among 1,000 scientific problems, 100 or so will be interesting, but only 1 or 2 will be truly rewarding, both to the world of science and to us. What we try to provide is the atmosphere that will make selecting the 1 or 2 in 1,000 a matter of individual responsibility and essentially automatic. So this is kind of problem selection. And, this is true, I think, of any lab where you have to kind of have this process of problem selection where you say, okay, we could solve any problem we want. We could design any experiment we want within reason, based on what we can measure and things like that. What would be the most salient to the kind of question we want to ask? So this is kind of, already something that people do. But they really kind of have to think about deeply about this problem selection step and how it serves applications. Now, this is not Fisk saying that the only relevant problems in electrical communication were those that served Bell's business interests, but it was him saying that the following: many scientific problems are kind of a Bohr or derivative. He ballparked it arbitrarily at 90%. So for an applied research lab, you're not trying to answer questions that don't lead to applications. You're not trying to answer questions that are really kind of hard to get your hands around, and those are not what in their purview. And so you also don't want to answer questions that are sort of already been answered. Some minority of problems are interesting. He ballparked that at arbitrarily at 10%. So that's interesting to that group of people. But when you have such a strong sort of definition of what your institution does, then of course you can have this kind of frame where you say, okay, these problems are interesting. It's a small number of problems, and then these other problems are kind of what we don't want to do. So we can have this sort of problem selection at a pretty high level. And then 1% or 2% of the interesting problems, that is 0.1% or 0.2% of total problems, because remember, our interesting problems are 10% of all problems, would turn out to be worthwhile and relevant to Bell's work. So a lot of problem selection and a strong criterion for it. This picture, this paints Bell's preferences for basic research as twofold. The picture this paints of Bell's preferences for its basic researchers is twofold. So this is kind of, what we want researchers to be doing with their time. The first point is that the universe of possible problems is very large. Bell would like it more fundamental researchers feel free to work on interesting ones. So they want people to just sort of directly engage in the most interesting stuff that's interesting to the mission of Bell Labs as defined in this strong definition. So, we don't want them to work on something that's totally off the wall, will never lead to any success or a success in building an application. And then 2, among the interesting problems, Bell Labs management would implement systems to make sure researchers identify problems that had a high probability of turning into profitable answers for the Bell telephone system. So this is, again, having this strong definition of what we actually want to do. And so you can do this with an applied lab or a lab with an applied component. But if you're just in a lab where you're not doing any sort of applied work, it's a little harder to do. I guess you could say replace that with scientific impact. But, that's, again, hard to know in the same way that you know what's profitable, right? Like, for Bell Telephone, they know kind of what is profitable and what isn't. That's kind of a separate issue, but it's also not, because you kind of know if something is going to be if you can maybe build something that turns a profit versus or fit into the existing profitable operations, as opposed to something that you would have to wait 20 years to turn a profit on or never turn a profit on. And with scientific impact, you kind of know if you can aim for a Nature paper, that's scientific impact. But there are a lot of papers that have scientific impact that aren't nature papers necessarily. So it's a little harder to do in a setting like that. Over the years, Bell Labs management developed a small but coherent set of constraints and rules of thumb to ensure that its researchers internalized that, as Jim Fisk put it, it was a matter of individual responsibility to choose the right problem. And that Bell Labs' success was in doing this at scale across thousands of individuals, and that this process be essentially automatic. So it's like people were trained to kind of think in that mindset of identifying problems in this way and satisfying this criterion. It wasn't something that managers did or enforced. It was something individuals did and enforced. It kind of reminds me of kind of how you think about open source projects where, you don't have strong managers. You have maybe project leaders, but you also have people who engage in projects who have to sort of identify what the useful contributions to a project are. So sometimes, if you have people fixing bugs or adding features, those are useful things. Sometimes you can, build the framework for something, and that's good, but it's a different set of it's a different set of contributions. So, in open source projects, we see this kind of ethos to some extent. And, sometimes it is limiting, though, because if you don't have a strong institution behind you, that maybe you don't get the same result. Okay, so Bell Labs research problem selection, rules of thumb, systems, and constraints. So the majority of Bell Labs is made up of applied researchers, development engineers, and other staff, not basic researchers per se. So the researchers, they didn't have the sort of interests that basic researchers had. They had the interests of applied researchers and engineers. And then they just kind of did some of the basic research that they could do. So it kind of shapes this problem selection, because a lot of really basic problems aren't very interesting to them by default, because that's not what they are socialized or enculturated to be interested in. And these groups usually have a normal set of projects assigned to them, while Bell's basic researchers did not. So, you had a difference between Bell's basic researchers and their applied researchers. So Bell had a different organization for basic research, and then Bell Labs did a lot of this basic to applied translation. Nevertheless, even though the basic researchers did not have bosses in the traditional sense, they were still nudged to Bell relevant problems in various ways. And so these three types of nudges were granting researchers what I would call a long leash but a narrow fence in which to conduct their explorations. So you could explore things, but then there was a fence too, which you could where you could go with that. Number two, facilitating very regular interactions between basic researchers and Bell's fundamental development researchers, engineers, manufacturing facilities, and implementation staff. So everyone interacted, knew kind of what their point of view was on things. To top it off, Bell had a core of what they called systems engineers, who ensured that the integration of its best researchers and most pressing problems was not left to chance. So the systems engineers tied everything together. Okay, so that was kind of the idea. So you had these, I guess they're interdisciplinary groups in the sense that you have people from different backgrounds talking to one another. You had this sort of long leash, narrow fence, which is basically where we enforce kind of what you work on, but not from a top-down way, but just kind of like, is this good for the lab, basically. And so those are, that's kind of the way they kind of approach this. And then, of course, they had these sort of, I don't know what to call them, weak ties, but basically people who linked two different networks together. So you had networks of engineers, networks of manufacturing managers, networks of development researchers, and they were all tied together by systems engineers who could translate between those groups. But those groups also interacted on their own. So you didn't have the traditional silos that you might get in an organization that segregates basic research from applied research in the conventional way that we know. So yeah, this is basically kind of going through some more personal interviews and kind of talking about some of the ways in which they think about freedom and their work and everything else. Yeah, so this is interesting. Pierce, who was giving this interview after his retirement from Bell Labs while he was at Caltech, then continues his reflection. So Pierce says, "Too much freedom is horrible. It's like telling a young child, do whatever you want to do." You've heard this story. There are various outcomes. One is, do I have to do what I want to? Complete freedom is not very helpful to a person who's inexperienced in the world. It's certainly bad to be directed to do things very, very narrowly and with no freedom. But it's my guess that for every person who needs more freedom, there are 10 people who need more help in finding their way. And so that's kind of an interesting quote. And so Pierce was an interesting case study because he came to understand exactly what development work was ongoing at Bell Labs, what it looked like for a basic researcher to do useful work, and then come up with a course of work to suit those needs. And then, of course, you had the frequent interactions of researchers, engineers, manufacturing facilities, and implementation staff. And that was key because it broke down these silos that you tend to get when people work in their own teams and then maybe just pass off the work from one team to another. So this is, again, Pierce gives some more oral history here about how there was this constant back and forth between different groups, different sets of expertise. And then Bell Systems engineers tied this whole process together. So systems engineers, as they were defined at Bell Labs, were about 10% of the total lab headcount. And they were usually technically trained individuals who spent all of their time on keeping one eye on the reservoir of new knowledge and another on the existing phone system and analyzed how to integrate the two. In other words, the systems engineers considered whether new applications were possible, plausible, necessary, and economical. So they, kind of had responsibility for knowing kind of what was going on in the field or what was going on in the scientific literature or engineering literature. And then they also had to keep their eye on the phone system as it existed. So any new innovations or any changes in new technologies, they had to integrate those things. So they could say, well, there's this new idea that's kind of up and coming in the literature, and we have this need in the phone system. Let's kind of match those two and bring them together. The existence of systems engineers was Bell acknowledging that a culture of openness and helpfulness was just not sufficient when it came to finding the best problems. Of course, implementation, manufacturing, applied research staff often could identify which of their problems are ripe for the research team's eyes, but a lot of times they can't. Sometimes researchers can come up with great research questions in their area that are ripe for helping a specific group's work, but a lot of times they don't do a great job. And so this is just kind of thinking about basic researchers finding a good applied problem, but also finding one that makes the best use of their time. So this is a twofold thing where you have a good problem to work on, where you can get an answer and build something that's profitable, but then is this the best use of your time? Because there might be more than one problem like that. Which is the best one to work on? And so can people reliably find these types of questions? And can they make that judgment as to what to pursue? Okay. And so systems engineers are pretty successful at this. This is Mervyn Kelly, who was a manager, and he described the background of systems engineers in the following way. Systems engineers must supply a proper blending of competence and background in each of the three areas that it contacts: research and fundamental development, specific systems and facilities development, and operations. It is therefore largely made up of men drawing from these areas who have, this is men in the time that we were talking about probably, who exhibited unusual talents in analysis and the objectivity so essential to their appraisal responsibility. So there's a trade-off. Now, instead of using a systems engineer skills for normal scientific research or engineering tasks, these individuals were doing other kinds of work. That's not a small trade-off. At points, Bell Systems' engineering team was about the same size or maybe larger than Bell's basic research group. So they were actually a little bit bigger than the basic research group, but in a large and complex organization like Bell, this trade-off was worth it. The systems engineers made it their business to be extremely aware of the happenings of the research portion of Bell Labs, as well as the minutiae of the industrial portion of the company as well. And so you needed to have a lot of details kind of at the ready for this. Of course, no individual systems engineer could know everything and everyone, but the department as a whole attempted to account for everything, ensuring as little as possible fell through the cracks. So in addition to bringing problems to researchers, systems engineers also found ways to deploy researchers' findings in ways that could solve problems in the field or improves Bell's products and processes. So that was their role. And they had to have this sort of return on investment calculus ready to go. Like they had to think about how could you evaluate an idea and think about the return on investment. So if you put money into it, you put time into it, what's the outcome? Is it worth it? And so this is just, kind of building this skill. And a lot of times, it was about, kind of acquiring the skill in the organization, but sometimes it was just individual skill building as well. And so I'm kind of skeptical that you could maybe have such a person or find someone to hire like that today. You may need to have them embedded in this culture of, how we build research, how we build, we have applied researchers and basic researchers, and we have people who can deal in different areas seamlessly. And, where do you build those skills today? Well, it's hard to know because we don't really have an organization like Bell Labs right now. So this just kind of talks about freedom and sort of how it comes in many forms. And so the one outlier here perhaps is Claude Shannon, who there are a lot of stories of Claude Shannon, quote unquote, frittering away his time playing games in the Bell lunchroom. These stories have become legendary. Shannon would build things like chess machines, juggling, and riding around on unicycles and pogo sticks. This was not the norm, but this was something that he did. So there's a reason why these became famous. It's because, it was sort of an outlier in the labs, but also maybe it became a shorthand for what went on at Bell Labs, and it simply wasn't the norm. So the bulk of the Shannon stories, or at least the most frittery ones, came after he became a celebrity in the communications world with his discovery or invention, depending on your philosophical view of mathematics, of information theory. On the heels of that discovery, instead of some big financial reward for Shannon, Bell Labs management seems to have paid Shannon with a kind of emeritus status, in which they gave the genius the freedom to do whatever he wished. This came with the freedom to do unique things like unicycle down hallways of work with the door to his office closed. So it was kind of like this special category they put Claude Shannon in, and they, kind of allowed him to do this. But prior to his emeritus lifestyle, Shannon lived a much more applied, standard lifestyle in the lab, where he was often roped into advising the applied folks on their issues and undertook more pressing concerns of basic research. Different things having to do with the war effort in World War II, other types of mathematical problems. Okay, so that was it. So this is, I think that's probably enough for this article. And they do make this contrast with the university. So, this is kind of in contrast to what happens at universities. University life surely had freedoms that Bell didn't, but most Bell researchers seem rather content with the trade offs that they made. So they gave up some of the freedom that you would find in a university for some of the aspects of the Bell Labs culture. And it's interesting because a lot of people maybe who didn't adapt well to Caltech, places like Caltech, adapted well to the Bell Labs environment. Okay, so I think that's all for that article. It was a nice article. Thank you, Hussein, for posting it in the Slack. Let's look at the chat here. Okay. Jess says that there's this link here, mershon.org, and some other things to follow up about this later. Okay, we'll as is an Asimov press article, we'll follow up on this later. Also, I can't find it, but the person who recently left Substack after founding it and why they made Substack the way they did. This is an article.
Yeah. So the first two were just relevant things that basically came from this week and last week. Mershon was someone who did a label-free research group at MIT,
Okay.
and then the Asimov press person was something else, which I'll get to that later. The Substack comment is I forget her name, but a few months ago she basically said, "Oh, I'm leaving Substack finally, and it's a very tough decision because we built it a certain way, and she's happy to move on and all this stuff." But it was basically about the designing process of Substack. And I think Substack is basically one of the better venues now for certain kinds of discussion. And I'm very curious how it came out to be built. But yeah, I'd like to get this article and send it to someone I know who worked at Bell Labs and get their take on it. So, hopefully, I don't put the link somewhere, please. I have a number of takes on it, and I don't know how much more time you want to spend on it because we have a lot going on here. I know Sarrah wants to present, so I guess I'll quickly say it's really interesting because I didn't know that I didn't know what a Bell systems engineer was until today. And I wonder if that's what my friend technically was because they fit that description really well. And in a sense, I think when I worked with them, they were kind of offering for me to be a version of that without me knowing it. So it's kind of like, wait a second, is this what you're trying to do? So that's kind of interesting. But more directly, I really wonder, it's very interesting to see what it was like back then, and also there's sort of this where I'm coming from right now, which I might, in the interest of time and other things happening today or whatever. Sorry, I seem to be having a lot of I even hear my own self, so I'm sorry, my mic's kind of weird. But in the interest of today, I will just say part of where I've been the last few weeks is deeply processing some, you could say maybe realities, if you will, which is a little bit grave sounding, but the article seemed to conclude, that the freedoms of academia and all this other stuff, and I feel like I think my stance on what different kinds of organizations can do has kind of had a big update, and sort of the nature of where things were. It's interesting to see problem selection. It's interesting to see how do you design an organization to target certain problems, and I think that's fascinating, but also I think I really want, and I don't know if this came from the article or not, or in the discussion. I missed a little bit of discussion, but essentially, could a Bell Labs happen today at all, and what would it look like? and what domain spaces would it function within? Is interest like could you have something where there's a slight majority of systems engineers relative to whatever the specific domain or application use, systems versus applied engineers, whatever the domain is? Yeah, you totally could. Like in at least in theoretical practice, like in theory, you could set it up that way. But like what does that mean, and what leeway, and how does that relate to problems, and how does that relate to like the political, economic, knowledge generation climate right now? And those are interesting things. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I could really go on for like probably an hour directly from that to other things, but I know we might want to wrap that up, and I'm sure Sarah wants to say things, and other folks might want to say things. So, anything else you want to say, Riley, before?
No, I think some of the links you posted are pretty interesting. We'll have to look at the Mercian one in a little bit, but yeah, I think you said we do have time. You said you had some other thoughts on this.
Yeah, without getting into the Mercian thing, because I saw his present. I was at an event with him, and he presented on what he did. The Asimov thing is for that was a talk through Ecolopto computational group, whatever, and that was about there's a small community of people trying to basically figure out how to do some new kinds of research organizations. So this could potentially, the article and this discussion might be something I mentioned there, basically. But beyond that, and the Substack thing, I think is just very interesting to see a modern, like Substack to me feels very intentionally aware in terms of creating a community around ideas. And I'm currently we've talked about this before, but I'm currently I don't want to say fascinated. I'm very much interested in, as you know, I'm developing sort of JoPro and this futures center thing, and with it is sort of this like, okay, what curriculums are needed, and I think part of a curriculum that I think is required is essentially the topic we're talking about here. Like, how do we do this? And I think, how do we make institutions or groups that focus on things that matter? And I was just reading by happenstance, like, I follow the Cosmos Institute. We don't have to read this, we don't have to look at this, but like here, that's their recent take on like, something from one of their seminars about, I don't know, this is a feedback from their seminar about, I don't know, the stuff that they're doing. And I'm very deep in this problem space of how are you creating an organization? How are you training the people to participate in the organization? Or in I just want to say organization, I just mean, I don't know, to do it. Like it doesn't have, whatever form it is, group of people, research trying to do whatever the thing is. But like the training of the people, the organizational structure, and then the sort of sobriety of a theoretical problem space or domain versus the realities of the world that we're in and what can be done in them. And I'm curious, and I would ask this sort of as someone who probably knows a bit more about the article we just read and Bell Labs in general, like, apparently systems engineers are given a lot of leeway to explore or be abreast of the field. And I assume that doesn't just mean like reading papers. It's feedback from the board, like you said, feedback from different, like being actually in these different spaces and kind of knowing, okay, this group or this school of thought or this industry or this component of a particular whatever is going this direction. And so I don't know, I find that to be like, how do you well, first, is there anything you want to say about those set of things before I take another direction on it?
No, it's fine.
Okay. I just feel like I've come to a new vantage point on, I think, what one of the interesting things in the Cosmos thing that I saw, I was just reading that prior to this, basically. I didn't read all of it, and I don't think it's like the greatest. I don't want to go to the post at all, honestly. I don't. But it offers a nice sort of conjecture, like, oh, what's science going to look like? Is it just in the future? Is it going to be like just a bunch of, like, labs all over the world making all these papers? Which I kind of chuckled at the idea of the future is people making papers, because the future is not going to be people making papers the way that it has been. Like, it doesn't even happen now, and there's so much. Like, part of conversations in earlier this week with Asimov and everybody else, like, making a paper is a wonderful thing to do, but like making a paper 20 years ago and 10 years ago versus now versus the future, like, did I post it in the Slack or you posted? But like archives updating their paper policy, like, because there's just so much Gen AI papers and stuff now, and it's just like the idea of a paper itself, I think, is kind of a funny thing in the sense of it's important, but things are changing, and one of the things in the Cosmos link is basically like AI can totally help science innovation if you think the problem is volume, because it can certainly enhance volume and speed of certain things, but is that really the problem? And I think where I'm at right now is, like, my conviction has grown so much in the last few years, particularly the last year or so, about the broad, you can phrase it positively or negatively. A negative way to say it might be a broad inability or almost gimping of a certain kind of systemic awareness when we're training people at very high, to say a hot take soundbite, I'm really convinced now that at very high levels of institutions and development, and both private and front, and this is interesting, both privately and publicly, or whatever you want to say, there's a real limit placed on certain things, and not even a sense of people trying to say wag their fingers or be restrictive and red tape it, but much more like, I don't know, and I'd be really curious, because I don't know enough about labs and system engineers and all this stuff, but it sounds almost like 100% antithetical to promoting system engineers as a predominant force in anything, in the sense of, or at least in the sense of generalist, or people like trying to do this. Like, in most of my formal training, I've had zero contextualization, and in much of the, like, I'm talking to many young people now, and trying to deal with them as they're going through tech careers, and like I said, I'm doing stuff for like NICWIC and people coming up with their careers there, and people in data science programs, and people in the Boston innovation community, and there's such a really strong sense of kind of inadequacy of the training. Like, the training is very limited, and that's, I'm not an undergraduate or graduate education or formalized training is going to be only one thing, and its ability to update is only so much relative to fast changes. But sure, but there's also just this I have a very strong sense that there's a kind of illiteracy around, you could say, future stuff, but I mean a literacy about how their domain has come into being and where their particular domain is going. And I kind of just, Bradley's known me and Morgan's known me for a couple of years now, and it's like, what I'm saying sounds like what I've said a few years ago, but it's a dramatically different feeling, because it's not just, oh, we need to have frontier maps, or epistemology directories are cool, or knowledge maps are really important. Now it's a sense of like, no, like I think we've really trained generations of people to just not get it, like to not. They want to. It's just the incentive structure and the training structure are not there, and so a lot of what goes through the startups, and kind of like startups are supposed, especially here in Boston, like you have this startup community of, take your idea, go to startup, then you can really refine your idea. And it's like, not really. Your startup is fit to market. And if you have innovation relative to that, it's usually innovation relative to a market fit. And there's very, very, very few. You hear things like deep tech strategy, like there, or like, oh, I'm going to make moonshots, and it's like, okay, are you really though? And so there's quite a bit of tension between how do you really define an idea and industry development and idea development and theory, and are you changing the system, and what is your systemic buy-in, and now there's another layer of there's like the AI hype, an AI bubble, if you will, of just like, what are you doing? And I find there to be just a massive amount of it's almost like it's underground. Like I think that's, to say another hot take, in this community, in the Boston community, you have your mainstream, like you have mainstream, okay, I want to be tech, I want to go into biotech, I want to go into health tech. Those things are very clear paths. But for people trying to do some of what we're talking about, or what we're kind of implying or getting at here, it really feels underground, in the sense that some of it's highly popularized now with like big, massive, come join our residency, and I've kind of had a mocking tone about residencies in some ways, but it's like, I actually think, well, that's what else you're going to do right now. Like if you're a young person trying to do these things, you're not going to do it in most established places, and you kind of have to find your group of people, and there's going to be weird funding things about it, and weird communities, and that's just what it is. And maybe that's how it's always been, but it really feels like for people trying to really pursue certain ideas, you have to kind of go, even if it's like glitzy and well funded, there's a very particular arena that you're entering into with trying to like understand and build and innovate things that are adjacent to the legitimacy producing and the funding producing establishments. And I'm sure it's like, I'm sure Morgan or Bradley could say like, oh, well, I'm sure there's an element of that's how it's always been. But I do think there's a contemporary battleground right now, or at least the contemporary view from what I'm seeing myself and other people coming up through things right now is like, there's a very clear awareness that for those who want to look at it, a lot of people want to go through a data science program and just like, okay, how do I do this? And I work for Amazon, I want to increase performance. And that's, that's what it is, and fine. But for people that are looking at like even data ethics or responsible AI, or, trying to do more society ethics tech related things, or frankly, who are just sort of a little bit more aware about the world and sort of like the care and how empires of AI and what's going on at OpenAI, and like people were kind of like trying to be savvy about what they're stepping into. It's like, well, it's not really being taught in school. It's not. There's a kind of a disincentive to knowing it, but it also dominates careers. And so it's like, what I find people to be quite a bit left on their own about it. And I've said that many different times in many different forms. But to kind of wrap up my diatribe or whatever this is, I think for people, I think there's a very real sense of, for people trying, and they are there, and I'm very hopeful to see them aggregate in different spaces. But for people that are trying to build a new Bell Labs about problems that matter, I really think there's a tremendous sense of it being I think underground's a bit too strong, and it's because of the old jam song. I did some punk rock thing for Halloween, so it's in my head. But like underground isn't just like it isn't built yet, and people are going to have to build it. And how do we do it? And I think there's a very sincere interest in people who do want to do things that are. I think business as usual, and that's sort of like education as usual, if you will, are pretty. Okay, I don't even mean radically. I'm not like I don't see this as even a radical comment anymore, which is sort of the thing. But I think they're kind of noticeably lacking, and people are trying to find, okay, how do I develop technology? How do I train myself? How do I understand the world? How do I try to do, or do real science or do real meaningful insight innovation? And I think we talked a few times ago. I looked in the Slack about the sensory motor club and the debate structure of the synthesis. Like that's great. This paper's this article is very interesting in terms of what was it like, and I'm looking forward to follow up with my Bell Labs former colleague person, and things we talk about here too. Like I think these are. I guess I'll conclude by saying I think these aren't kind of like just nice things to think about anymore. Like I think these are actually the real problems. And I don't know who's really looking at them other than things that I'm trying to do, and like kind of here and things in JoPro, and then a little bit in sort of Ecolapto adjacent community of people trying to look at it. It's like I think there's a very real question of how do we do this kind of stuff, and people are interested and they don't. It's like this sudden realization of, okay, it's 2025, we don't really know how to do this. like we're all bumping up on people really want to know. Like I guess I'll say that, like people really want to know how to do these kind of things, and they're and across many fronts I'm realizing they don't know, and because like, oh, it's up to us to build it. Like whatever the mechanism and literacy and kind of the praxis of doing the thing is going to be for us to build what the 2025 the 2025 to the 2020s and the 2030s. Like what does this even try to look like here? Like it doesn't really exist right now, and people are kind of realizing we need to do some things differently, and it's exciting, but it's also my personal take on it is exciting, but it's also the realization that, oh wow, like there isn't like a secret Bell Labs heading somewhere that's just going to enlighten everybody with their Bell Labs wisdom about it. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't. I think that's the conviction for me now is like there is no one. I don't like the phrase "oh, no one's coming to save you," but much more. It will not be built until we choose to build it, and it hasn't been built. So right. I'll conclude with that.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Jesse. That's a great conversation to think about and think, kind of build off of later. But yeah, a lot of interesting points about building institutions and how people are trained and how people access sort of this, problem finding and question building and things like that.
Yeah, like framing the problem space. Mm-hmm. And then empowering people and making that relevant to our contemporary times is going to be, a lot more questions than answers in that right now. But I do think people I'm heartened because I think people really want to make some things around that specifically. So yeah, like really quickly, the immersion person. He presented at there was sort of a hackathon type thing, biological hackathon here in Boston, and I was involved with that a couple weeks ago, and it's interesting because he basically was, a proponent of this label-free group about just trying to identify problems and sort of coming up with a domain and names for them later. And I don't know if you're familiar with immersion or not, But it's an interesting guy. And I think he's going to try to do a little bit of things with some of the Ecolab group too. I guess his book is like perceptual engineering, olfaction, other senses. Like he's very interested in like a lot of molecular, information stuff, and like not just dogs being able to interpret different things about people, but it's sort of his jam for that. So
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Looks like Sarah's here. And Sarrah contacted me and wanted to present on some things that she was at the GSoC Mentors Summit last week in Germany, and so congratulations on that. Looked kind of fun. So Sarrah is going to be presenting in a minute here.
So yeah, basically, I got selected to attend the Mentor Summit. Basically, while GSoC was going on, there's like a Google form that's floated, as in like, would you be interested to attend the summit? And I had filled that in. And of course, like for the summit, there's like designated like maintainers and org admins usually from each org are the ones who are designated spots to attend. But then, of course, like if some of them are not able to attend, slots get freed up, and that's when they take the people who expressed interest to attend, and like from a wait list, and they take them. So I was selected as that. So apart from me, officially representing INCF, there were two other people. So there was the main. I was talking to Arnab Banerjee, but Arnab was not able to attend. So there was Matthew Adams who attended as the org admin, and then there was another mentor named Dimitri who also attended who was also from another sub org in INCF. And it was from the 23rd to the 25th of October. It was an amazing experience. It was in Germany, so I got to travel there as well. And it was like the first day was basically a welcome dinner where we all just got to meet each other. There were about, I think, 180 people attending, Google staff, the mentors, and everybody included. And we all got to meet each other, interact about what our orgs did and all. And it was just like a welcome dinner on the first day. And then the second day is when it actually started. So throughout, it was in this like unconference format that like Google propagates, where there were no like there were very few one-to-many sessions. The most prominent of them were the lightning talks, which were held on the second day in two sessions. So that was very similar to how I've also given GSoC contributor lightning talks. So a very similar format where each speaker gets 3 minutes and they kind of give you like a sneak peek into what their org does and what they did this year. And apart from that, unless it was like some announcement, everything was in an unconference format where there weren't actually like one-to-many sessions, but they encouraged that anybody who wants to hold a session, put it up on a board. They had a whole board with like time slots and put it up on the board if it's, if the slot is open. And like for a conference room, so there were about 7 conference rooms where these sessions were going on simultaneously. And most of them were like discussions. So you get together in a conference room that has a capacity of say 18 people, 20 people, 40 people at the max, and all of you like sit around a table and you put ahead what is your topic and everybody just discusses on it. And the topics to that range from like everything from AI and how bad is it or how good is it, to actual problems that people are facing in their orgs, to things that people wanted to share and talk to others about. So I did 2 things regarding our org. One was I was trying to give a lightning talk. So there were registrations open for the lightning talk in advance, but unfortunately there was like a slight miscommunication with Matthew, and I thought he was giving the talk and he thought I was giving the talk for INCF. So unfortunately, we didn't get like a proper slot in. So the actual slots given by the GSoC team filled up. But then there was another time where the ballroom where the lightning talks were held were open. So a few of us who were on the wait list and wanted to presented then, which was on Sunday, I think. So yeah, I kind of had this like the first three slides from this presentation, which I presented as our lightning talk. One of which was this, where I highlighted like everything that we have done so far in like our open source community sustainability project, from like the three different approaches done in 2022 with the published paper to my approach in 2024. And then, of course, I wanted to focus on this year. So I also presented Vidhi's project and how she has incorporated everything from the past few years and added her own metrics and her own new ideas into this project, and also her findings that she compiled in the preprint. So all of this to like kind of give everybody an idea into what Urel does. And yeah, so this was a lighting talk. We also recorded it. I think if once I get the video, I'll try to put it up on the Slack. So this was that. And then another major thing that I did was what I posted about. So I tried to hold a session on the open source community sustainability and kind of wanted to talk about the metrics, that like, because that's like one of the things that we face a lot as well. Where like I remember even in my year that was a question I asked, and even that was also a question that Vidhi had asked me, where like how do we, like we're making the simulation, what are the metrics for this? And there's been a lot of discussion about this, and we've all gone through like Bradley's drive on like all the papers that have it. But I also wanted to discuss with everybody there, because they are the people in those open source communities, and these are the people that have been sustaining it for quite some time. So I held this session, and even though it was a 9 a.m. session in the morning, like I held it in a capacity of 18 people of a room with the capacity of 18 people, and about 22 people showed up. So there were 4 people standing for like the duration of the 1 hour session. But it was a very like people were very excited to kind of talk about this topic. And yeah, so like this page is like the notes that I had taken through during the session, but I was also trying to compile it because we can also put it up on the official like the website, the summit website. So but yeah, some of the main things that we talked about there. So first I presented like what Oral has been, because at this point my lightning talk had not yet already been done. So to give like sort of some context into what we actually do, I kind of presented those similar slides. And what was the reason that I was, wanted to discuss this. And then we had like some discussion. So the main two questions that I posed to the group was, the first was, what is the core definition of sustainability, and like, how should it be measured? Should it be qualitative, quantitative? How? So should it be like just contributor retention, or should it be the kind of work that is getting done compared to the cost? Because at that point I'd also attended a session talking about like what goes on behind the funding of open source communities. So that was also a big thing in my mind. And yeah, so that was what we talked about. And then these are like some of the insights. One was that like, of course you need contributor retention, but then the main thing is like the project health needs to be maintained. So you also need to get new people and retain old people, which is like tale as old as time, but also something that was discussed in quite detail with like everybody's own experiences. Then another thing that like a lot of maintainers who attended, like the maintainer of the Misa Foundation and the maintainer of Music Brains attended this, and thing that they said was like good enough is like actually better than perfect, because they don't want, because if contributors, if they are focused on like perfect and they give too many critiques, people lose interest in contributing, and at some point it's software, it will be agile. So it just needs to be good enough to go in this release. So that was something that like according to them was like quite important for long term sustainability. And then I introduced that, like, we are using agent-based simulations for modeling. And at the end, like, they were also really interested in those like graphics and all that I showed. So quite some people like came up in the end and were like, send us links to this. It looks quite interesting. And yeah, so another major thing that I wanted to talk about with them was quantitative versus qualitative metrics, because like many indicators I feel are subjective. And how do we actually try to see, even if we're looking at a community, see if it's sustainable? So some of the metrics that we talked about were like, so one was retention, which of course like could be done, checked by like GitHub PRs, whether this person is contributing for X amount of time. So it is quantitative, but like it was like agreed upon as like, this is one of the base indications of, whether this person is motivated to be in your community. So that was one thing. Then like another thing that someone suggested was like lines of code as well. So I also pointed out that this was also something that we had modeled in one of our 2022 models, where like it's not every PR is the same. So there could be like a basic earth shot, moon shot versus like a Mars shot. This, and also like these notes are not final, so I'm just making this for the rest. And then another metric was the engineering health and the product health. So engineering health was like activity tracking. People also mentioned like two of the people from two different orgs mentioned that they actively use like these softwares, which basically are like what GitHub, those GitHub like squares do, but like on steroids, where like it tells you everything, tells you like how many PRs, who commented, who raised a bug, and like gives you like a very zoomed out view of it in terms of graphs. So they are basically like they track your health, and especially they mentioned that it was especially useful when there were multiple repositories. So any org that kind of deals with multiple repositories, and like so GitHub does not sync across them. So like they were highly encouraging to use these, and they didn't mention like these tools had to be like deployed themselves. They were like a bit difficult, but like if you are an org that heavily relies on knowing your user base and your contributor base, so this was like a quite an important and worth it thing to do. And then the other also like indicator that people discussed of sustainability was the fact that product health. So like just understanding what your contributors or your developers are doing is not enough. Like you also need to understand the product value to the user base, and like the user base is quite important as well for actual sustainability of your community. So taking user surveys, feedback. So that was also like a great metric that people suggested. And that's of course like it can be like quantified with like an insight. Somebody can say that, yeah, if user surveys are mostly positive, that's good. Or there can also be like, people are also discussing that there can be very edge cases where we notice that mostly people only comment when it's something negative, or only leave a review when it's something negative. So that can of course skew the results, which is why it needs like a qualitative insight to know where you actually put that survey. But then it is also at the end of the day a good metric, and you need to like make decisions about the quantification, like just not just what the contributions are. And then the other main thing that I wanted to discuss was like how do all these like human factors, and especially the communication, which was like something that I tried to model in my 2024 project as well. So how does that come together for a healthy community? So like should it just be code contribution, or like how much of a metric is the communication part of it? And everybody agreed that like if you're talking about community, like sustaining the community, like the communication is a very important part of it. One is like, also we discussed like how do we invite contributors into our community. And the first thing is like, you need to not make it very like domain specific as well. And then being like warm and welcoming. Someone mentioned that like they make it a point to reply to every single message that is dropped on their IRC, no matter how small it is, no matter if it's during the Google Summer Code season where there's like a lot of them, but they do reply to everything because it's important for like people to know that this is an active community and they are welcome there. Then another thing that was discussed was like you need to also protect the community because they like about three people shared this experiences with like toxic contributors where unfortunately they had to like either fire them or ask them to politely step aside because they were making everything so either about themselves or trying to be so perfectionist in everything that it was detrimenting the like the overall project. And like another thing that everybody talked about was like the fact that it should spark joy. So it was like, even though like it's a very indirect metric, but the overall community should be happy, and that's the only way to sustain long term. Then also big point was that there's not just contributions are not just code. So for a lot of people, contributions are in the form of data that the users give back, that the users upload. For some people, contributions are in the form of like workshops that people take, teaching other people to use their product. So documentation and in just active community engagement was like a main thing. There was another like major thing that like there are main contributors in every project and then there are hobbyists that just do a few bugs or something, and that's like a differentiation that has to be qualitative, but that is something that makes difference because losing a main contributor does much more harm to your sustainability. So that was one thing. And then there were like some suggestions on how to prioritize feedback and communication, especially for some people that were facing it actively in their communities. Like there was someone from the Processing Foundation who was I think, the project leader of the P5.js product and library. And they were saying that like because the majority of their users are school teachers and they don't want to already burden them, they're already quite burdened. They don't want to increase it by saying tell us what's good with our product, contribute to us. But then there were suggestions on like how they could do that, or they could pick a time where like there is summer, school is off, but like it's important to get active feedback from your users. And then another discussion was like the need for hierarchy. So especially for like big communities, you cannot just let everybody do it on their own. So what, or even the maintainer cannot do it all on their own. So what Robert Dave suggested, the maintainer of Music Brains, was he suggested that he has the idea of keeping lieutenants where they help to share work and each lieutenant is in charge of like a particular component, and then they know what to do with everything regarding that, what contributions to accept, what PRs to review, and also what like actively new features to take up. And also if there is someone doing something wrong, doing something toxic, the lieutenants also help out in that instead of just one single maintainer. And then another thing was that use, like especially when it comes to funding and everything, so users were like one of the main things for long term sustainability. Like everybody shared that like it was very important for users to be like for a product to basically have as many users as possible before trying to figure out how to sustain it. So make a good product, make a good better user base. And there was this like 2%, somebody suggested the 2% campaign rule where like after 2% of users typically end up contributing. So a large engaged user base is like the key to long-term sustainability. So there was that. There was another thing which people discuss is like negative incentive, where like they notice that if the website goes down or there's an issue in the product, that is when one, a lot of people get engaged in the community, and unfortunately that is also when a lot of donations come into the community. Even though like donations, a lot of people accepted that like donations are not what drives the community, like that's not the source of their funding. But that is what like gets people interested. As long as the product is working fine, people tend to ignore the survey links and tend to ignore everything. And then someone also discussed how like how the community reacted when they closed the old bug report actually led them to believe that yeah, this is a feature that a lot of the community uses that they actually didn't know. So there are these like very minute things as well that can um, indicate what actually is the users and the developers are both facing. So yeah, that was like mainly about the session that I conducted. And apart from that, there's also like quite a few interesting and important people I met. Right after the session, there were two people. So there was Kit from the Processing Foundation who said that she would, like to use the. She was interested in like all the graphs and metrics we made during the um, uh, GSoC projects, and she asked for links for all of those. And there was also I'm gonna have a bit of trouble pronouncing his name, but I believe Ewout from the who's like the maintainer of Misa Foundation. And again, like he said, like you all are doing stuff on agent-based modeling, and I really like the UI that was built, especially for the 2024 project. So since we have everything to do with agent-based modeling, we should connect and kind of try to see if we can get this sort of UI incorporated in Misa as well. And then apart from that, I also attended a few sessions. One was from Andreas, who works in JSBML, and he's a professor of bioinformatics in some university. I forgot the name of the university, but uh, he basically held a lightning talk and also a session about how to get people, like the lightning talk was about what his organization does, and the session was about how to get people more interested in bioinformatics and like the various things that they face, such as uh, like in the discussions, one of the things that everybody faced was like data formats, and then so the gatekeeping of data. So there isn't enough data because a lot of it is curated by private hospitals and it's then paywalled. So yeah, I also like talked to him about DevoWorm a bit, and that is someone that like we can look at. And then also I attended a few lightning talks from like mentors at Scala and mentors at DBpedia Association. And another like quite important person I met was there was of Upside Down Labs, and when he heard that I work in a like I was affiliated with INCF, so Upside Down Labs is like a startup based in Bangalore, India, and they make DIY neuroscience kits, especially for the purpose of teaching. And he basically shared his contact, and I thought that maybe we can look at this, because I know in JoPro and all there are, I think, some kits being used. So there's also someone that we can connect with. And also like realized there that some of the people from my college have also used this like bioamp pills for one of the hackathons project as well. So we kind of got to know each other there as well and realized that we have like crossed paths in a way. But yeah, that was like high level excerpts from the this, and I'll unmute now for, and I'll drop the links for all of this. So this is the Upside Down Labs. So yeah, the Grimoire Lab and Augur were the two like um the two sessions, the two softwares that people suggested. So for open source sustainability and for like checking the metric. And I also was in the chat. And yeah, scaling and user bases definitely. And Morgan, I believe, I don't know if you meant, I think you meant Upside Down Labs, yeah? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think we can, like, I can talk now as well. I will mute.
Yeah, so thank you, Sarrah, for that presentation. That was great. I'm glad you met some connections and had some pretty good discussions. Um, so yeah, I mean, there were a lot of things that kind of came up here that were interesting. We had talked about Chaos and Augur before. That was like a platform that where they kind of analyze communities, actually analyze things from data, and try to spit out trends. But some of the other things was that there's this distinction between the perfect and then the sort of the good enough. And so the good enough is actually better because people don't want to spend too much time thinking about how to make things perfect, which is interesting. I guess what that means is that the development of the software happens later, out of the purview of like the immediate sort of contributor collaboration. But yeah, and then of course you talked about some needs for hierarchy. So we think of open source as being a distributed collaborative enterprise, but a lot of times people will put in like hierarchical components to that. And of course, sometimes it is the culture of the organization where, and we talked about this with Bell Labs, where you have these connectors or weak links between different groups. In this case, I guess what they're advocating for is something more controlled or hierarchical. But there are different ways you can structure your organization to sort of facilitate, um, you know, um, cooperation and things like that. And what else? Yeah, a lot of good stuff. Just a lot of good stuff to think about. Um, so I've been preparing the presentation for the ActInf Symposium on this open source sustainability project. And yeah, I've noticed a lot of these same things that we've been talking about here. And so, yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you were able to present too on this. And I'm glad that someone thought that you had some pretty good UI skills. So, yeah, definitely pursue that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I plan to reach out to him once I get some free time. But yeah, definitely. Yes, also, hopefully a Medium blog soon. I'm just like just trying to settle down for now, but soon, yes.
Yeah, no hurry, but like it's great to see that and to see everything going there. It's always nice to physically congregate when so much stuff is virtual and have a good time and then have artifacts from it and try to make things that sustain it over time. Not ironically, but like so that'd be great. But good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Also, once I get the audio and video and photos from them, so I'll try to share them in the Slack as well.
Great.
Yeah, that would be great. So yeah, we have a bunch of things in the chat here. The link to Upside Down Labs, the Chaos project, and the Grimoire Lab tool, the Augur tool, and yeah, and some affirmational posts in there. So yeah, well, thank you once again for that presentation.
Thank you.
Oh, Vidhi had a question.
Yeah, so great question. So actually, so like the people there, as I said, like there are two. I'll just mute for like 5 more minutes. I'll answer. Yeah, so as I was saying, so other people, there are two mentors from each organization that are officially invited. The organization decides who to send, and mostly they send the org admins. Sometimes they send some org admin or maintainer and some of the newer mentors as well. So for them, it's completely like the stay is of course sponsored, and Google also reimburses them for the flights and all the expenditures. I was one of the mentors selected from the wait list. So I was a third mentor from INCF who attended. So for that reason, my also stay was sponsored, but my like the amount I got for the flights was half of what the mentors that are officially sent get. So it covered like about, I would say, 70% of my flights. And another thing that happened was, so the summit was in Germany, in Munich, Germany, and they had provided a letter to that I could use to get a business visa, invitation letter. But unfortunately, again, because I was one of the mentors from the wait list, I got this invitation like around 2 to 3 months, 2.5 months, I think, before the summit actually happening. And in Mumbai, in India especially, a lot of students are applying to Germany for their masters and stuff. So due to some reasons, the visa slots were completely booked out. So I was not able to get a visa appointment to Germany. So I was unfortunately like forced to go. I mean, not forced. I thought of like I kind of what I tried to do is get a Schengen visa and made a trip fit with my mom, and we went to Switzerland. And I was vacationing in Switzerland for 4 days, and then we went to Germany. So like that part of it was obviously not sponsored. And I ended up spending, but I got a vacation. So all good. I
Yeah. And Vidhi said, what an experience to have. So, yes, definitely a good experience, and, great stuff. Oh, yeah, Morgan, did you want to say something in more detail about any of that, or?
No, that was wonderful to hear about, and yeah, I certainly hope that becomes a write up or blog post too, and it's just thinking again about the project in terms of the things, I mean, like we've talked about chaos before,
Yeah.
but like again, chaos is like sort of an extension of it's kind of an extension of the metrics, the kind of conventional metrics that are available through the it's like, hey, if we get people to use particular frameworks and particular tools, right, that we can kind of collect more data about them.
Right.
Right. And yet, there were several things that Sarrah was talking about that, are not captured by those things. Yeah. And are potentially things you could have in agent-based models, but are honestly difficult, or certainly like the way in which we implement them in those models is it's usually a somewhat abstract, inaccurate
Right.
way, but it's the great YouTube channel, I can't remember how do you actually pronounce it now. It's like Veritasium.
Oh yeah, Veritasium.
It's Veritasium. Yeah, Veritasium. It's something like that, right? And does these kind of explanations of technologies. He just did one on artificial life,
Okay.
and it's it's like the models work not because they are an accurate representation, right? It's more like it's more about the models give you something, regardless of their accuracy in terms of their accurate representation real world things, but it's like it's more just our difficulty in being able to project what those future solutions will be from that kind of cellular automata, or like game of life, like games, right? Or like and I'm just trying to think of the modeling framework that Brian was using.
Oh, the active inference, like PyDMP.
Yes, but he was using the older. He was using like a Python version of that older framework. It was popular.
Markov decision processes.
Sorry?
Markov decision processes.
No, I mean, I know that was what he was doing.
The net logo, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, like a tool that was used in kind of political science and national security simulations, where it was just like it wasn't so much about the accuracy, it's about if we assumed these things, what would happen in these simulations, and anyway, the point being that I think some of those features that we have trouble finding computational representation are should still somehow be a part of these simulations, or but with that known caveat, right? Like it should it would be more theoretical, as opposed to chaos, which is like somewhat more like the chaos tools are somewhat more like a management tool.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of mean that in a pejorative way.
Right.
And as opposed to a understanding tool, right? Or a research project. Anyway, just in defense of theoretical research.
Yeah.
And it just kind of comes back to my question that always comes to mind when I think about the open source software sustainability project, which is what are its goals, and what processes are of most interest, right? So it's like, I mean, I love each year's technical technical achievement, as well as what that technical achievement focuses on.
Right.
And it's just like with the LLMs, with the agents there, it became very like I've mentioned, it became very like multi-agent software production, which I was asking last week, how much of that is now a part of Claude and Copilot in terms of their own, those engineering teams, and I was just looking at because Cursor 2.0 came out, which is definitely is a team specifically focused on that, and a team that's tried to develop their own models, but are anyway. Point being that that's still somewhat different, and still needs to capture if you talk about its sustainability, it's still missing the kind of the human interaction, social features that Sarrah talked about too. Anyway, it's that was what was coming to mind, and then earlier with Jess and I had the computational philosophy. I think is it the salon? I forget what he calls it. But it was fascinating to hear the Asimov Press editor's backstory, and super interesting to hear what he hopes to get from the work he's doing. It's very, very inspirational. I thought it's like I'll ride this gig until I can't, and then I'll find something else. Which he has a wonderful independence.
Yeah.
But in terms of how that relates to because he talked a lot about both the Astera Institute, as well as the Astera Foundation. I forget now. Is Astera and Arc Institute.
In terms of the New Science group too.
Yeah, and I think you could probably throw Future House in there too, in terms of institutions that are set up not necessarily in they're set up to be different, not necessarily separate from academia, but certainly as someone mentioned in the salon, potentially like focused research organizations, which and so he talks a lot about what he saw, at least in those, in terms of their own backstories and how they wanted the researchers to work and to interact with other researchers, and to set how they wanted them to set their metrics, so it's something that you're definitely seeing again and again. I forget who raised the point, Jess, but it was but of course this all requires funding, and currently that funding is coming from high net worth individuals, which is
right.
Not necessarily the it's neither the
yes.
This does not represent a grassroots effort, and it so it's I just last thing is that I was with a play date with my daughter and her friend, and I got to meet her grandfather, her friend's grandfather, who formerly ran IBM research. And it was interesting to hear his stories in terms of how they ran their own group at the same time as and that IBM research also has a really an incredible record, and both his point being that like they have lots of theoretical researchers, um, like Bradley, who's the information theoretic computer scientist.
From IBM or?
Yeah. He's been at IBM forever. Mathematician. It is the minimally computational.
Minimum viable computing, whatever.
He also got involved in trying to. He has a project trying to mathematize biology. Which ends up being
Gregory Chaitin.
Thank you.
That's
yeah. I mean, so the point being that like they have people like Chaitin who like are not working on anything practical.
Right.
But also he was very proud of their kind of business wealth creation as well.
Yeah.
Like that they had and was I wish I'd it would have seemed impolite to be taking notes while we were on a beach in San Francisco, but I wish I'd been able to hear more of these stories in terms of because of course they were very aware and compared themselves to Bell Labs.
It's interesting because I'm clearly not old enough to know better about that, in the sense of Bell Labs, for the people that know about it and I don't know, lived it or whatever, like there's sort of this mystical quality to it, and I don't like I have like I've it remind like I'm in a sports analogy. Like I'm very familiar with like one of my favorite sports teams was just excellent and outstanding, and won like 80% of their games for like 60 years, and then recently they've been trash. So it's like the difference between the generation that just doesn't know, like, oh wow, like profound, versus like, well, and it's so interesting to kind of see, like, I've like, oh, I really should understand a little bit more about Bell Labs because I know about it, and I realize like I know people there, and we all kind of know some people that were doing things there or not. Also, I wanted to say very briefly, even though you said you were having this conversation on the beach or whatever, in my mind, for a wonderful moment, I was thinking like, oh, Morgan and his daughter having a play date, talking about stuff in a nerd circle at this, like, all like some wonderful like tea party, and just having like total nerd discussions while also doing that. And I was like, that was just a cool, very cool moment. And I mean that in the best way possible, because like I would, as a dad, I would love to do that myself. So, really good stuff.
Yeah. As opposed to being a very cold windswept beach, where we're kind of like huddling behind the any kind of cover we can find.
Yeah, exactly.
So, San Francisco beaches could be, we're not LA.
Yeah.
Well, I was even going to say, like, even by the Charles River here is pretty, like, especially this time of the year, it's like, well,
right.
maybe not the picturesque Bitcoin society. Going
And
through
somehow
the pain.
kids have a completely different, sense of temperature. So they're still getting wet, Anyway, but sorry, that would have been nice. I was hoping that we could that I could have invited him over for dinner or something like that, because it was really interesting.
Like to go back to Asimov press stuff, like your point, I don't know, like I feel like I want to say something like mildly insightful about it, but like I don't know what there is to say about like the billionaires and the big people funding our our stuff, and it's like if you were to have a very real talk suggestion with the other people right now about this, it's like, well, how do you get funding to do some of the things, and how do you do that, and how do you make yourself legitimate and rigorous and present. And I thought it was interesting because I think I forgot his name, Nico, I think. He kind of direct. I don't know if it was overt, but he basically suggests like his own model was like just write about it and then try to reach out about it and see if people will do it. Like Substack has kind of created a bit of a platform, but then it's like it doesn't make it easier. And the real problem of funding quote unquote science or quote unquote like I almost want to use a different term, domain space awareness and doing things in those spaces that amounts to knowledge generation, which may or may not be science, call it science or not. Like that whole thing is like, what do we do about that? So it was a good discussion from there, and I'm really curious. I don't know if this was said or implied, but like kind of what I was saying at my first round of all this stuff was, like there's a conversation that came up there that I feel like Bradley's discussion from this morning and what we're talking about here, and Dan Van Zandt, who's one of the stuff of the Wolfram Institute. Dan Van Zandt's got this little project on like trying to understand, like alternate research organizations or like new kinds of research groups trying to do research and stuff like that. And I'm basically trying to organize. I would like to have more and basically another version of the discussion, like host the next phase of the discussion. And I don't know what organizational banner it is, but I think there's a very important discussion to be had, and even from the. By the way, this is kind of an interesting tangent. I'll try to put here right now. At the summit, at the Augmentation Lab Summit, this came up because part of the second panel, which I wrote about in my Substack, was about funding and people from the 15, 17 and the other like Prospera and there's different groups doing different things like that, and like it's kind of a conversation that at least I kind of we've talked about here, and it came over there, and there's an ongoing conversation that should be harnessed a bit more. And as a slight tangent to that, if you're interested in Ken Liu, the author who was also at the event, there's an open Augmentation Lab is talking with him today, and you could like talk to him at 4 p.m. Eastern time at their thing if people are interested in that. So I put that in the chat. But more directly, like I think there's a conversation to be maintained, and I'm actually interested in trying to. I want to talk to like Dan and Addy from Ecolopto and maybe the guy from Asimov, and like there's a critical mass of people there. Like we can have more meaningful discussions ahead. So I don't yet know how to structure it, but I do want to do some things about that, even if it's as simple as just demarcating the space and offering a suggestion, because I think people don't, there isn't really like a playbook. Or I mean, there's a lot of like, I don't know, marketing playbooks for it, but like if you're just coming up through the system, and I think about a lot of the terms like a lot of what I think about these days, like, what is the curriculum that should exist that doesn't exist about this? And that's kind of why the Future Center exists in one sense, right? But like, what should a person know? Like, if they want to do X, Y, Z, how do they do it or support it, or like know that their work is contributing to something adjacent to it, or what is like the landscape? So I'm trying to do things in space.
Sorry, but are we talking about funding, or are we talking about the skills to do the work that they want to do? Because I thought we started out. I mean, the question I'm invariably asked is, do I stay in academia, or do I, become a founder? And I always, come back with like, how is that different?
Right.
In the sense that, like, either way, you're talking about a task that is not the work that you are trained to do.
Hoops.
That it's. I mean, Hough suggests that it's performative, and I mean, I just wanted to say that, like,
yes,
I think what was important for him to start Asimov Press was, both his experience in biology, right, which is very much his, like, traditional training, right, but then, he obviously had that magic, or he went and then went to journalism school, which not all journalists say that you need to do, but I think it is a great opportunity. He spent some time just focused on writing, and as a trade, right? And certainly I'm always super impressed with the PIs that I know. The successful PIs are all people who craft a great story from the work that they've done, with that, like, with just a little hint of, like, make a dash of, like, making it better than it actually is. Making it sound better than it actually is, right? Like, misrepresentation, but sorry, who's the political science statistician at Columbia? I got all these books in my head and I can't remember the he wrote Blue State, Red State, Rich State, Poor State. Anyway, there is a fine line between that dash of just making it a little better and becoming a self-promoting.
Well, and that's like reminding me of expert writing very much, like the concept of that. But yeah, to your point, like I think you're very yes about funding and then the skill set, and it not just being performative. Like there's an actual structure. Like when I meant Hoops in a more formal, like in a non-performative sense, like there's things you're going to have to do, whether it's a funder or head of a private lab.
That's not your academic training. It has nothing to do with the
exactly. And it's like and there's like even like the Ethos Foundation here and elsewhere, like there are people that are trying to like facilitate that, and maybe that's someplace that I should, I've been interviewing for different like program manager jobs and things like that, and it's really interesting to see. I think that informs a little bit of my recent I don't know what, where it's like, oh, like the managing of the operations, and then like the interfacing of the operations with the real world stuff, or these like other things than just doing the specific domain work. And how do you facilitate that? So yes, like how do you get the funding, and then how do you support like that kind of stuff? Even, particularly as like the bigger institutional, like there isn't really a Bell Labs anymore, I guess, and higher education is, you know, very. I mean, especially. I mean, you could say, especially right now, like it's a weird time, and there's a lot more to say than that about things that aren't just 2025, but like, you know.
I just, yeah, so like two, you know, a couple things that came up during the computational philosophy salon. As when what was his name? Van Sant?
Van Sant, yeah.
Yeah, Van Sant. It made me think of David Krakauer talking about technological progress. I mean, in terms of trying to, you know, like what are the forces that go into these and this old British TV show called Connections with Burke, I think it was his name. That was this wonderful like you'd never guess the kind of, you know, the backstory of technology and how little it had to do with like what the person was, you know, formally working on. And the one last thing, which is you know, is at the Big Brain Conference, and Alan Evans, who leads it. So Big Brain Conference is just about basically like neuroimagers settling on one brain and you know, slicing it at like 1 micron thickness. But he was introducing a researcher at Jülich, and he was just like, you know, I forget the guy's name. Like the great thing about Marcus is that he's one of those people that is always working on stuff that he's not supposed to be. and he said something like every great research organization needs a Marcus.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
and you know, and like again, I think there's, you know, I don't know if there's like the perfect org,
Right.
you know, or like, you know, the perfect, you know, whatever the perfect org is, it has to have somebody who's the destabilizer if they work.
Right, no, exactly. I had a conversation with someone looking to build an organization very recently, and it without to, I'm sure we have other things we want to talk about. Oh, it's actually super late, so I'll just wrap this up really quick. Sorry, Barry. I didn't realize how long of a time it was. I'll just say it's such a balance too, even ahead of time, because the size and the scope of the organization really depends on, like, if you want to tackle a very specific problem, you're going to have a very clear vision about it and bring people that are going to be like toe the line of it, or like be company men for that process mostly, but you need enough room to do the actual work of exploration too. And as you're, you know, and that changes, like when that changes for scale or pivoting or scope or funding, or like, okay, well now we want to do this, that can change a lot of those things. And it's very challenging to it, you know, kind of like greatness cannot be planned of it. Part of it is like you can't I'm very interested in people that want to solve very specific problems, and it's sort of this dilemma between let's solve a specific problem and how do you have, like, you know, that what you said, like there's no perfect organization, but there's a certain amount of like kind of like some ideal maybe allostatic points or ratios of like this much divergence versus this much, you know, dogma, or if you will, or like this much prescribed plan of action about what you should do.
and so on. So I feel like there's so many ways I keep going, so I'll cut it up there and offer to Bradley to say what you want us to keep talking anything or not. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good stopping point, and I think that was a perfect kind of ending point that every organization sort of needs someone who can kind of do what they're not supposed to be doing and be a disruptor and that sort of thing, whatever. But like a Claude Shannon type at Bell Labs.
Yeah, and like there's a special like, not just saying you need this elite. It doesn't have to be magical, but like there's a certain like they have to be able to do that within the security of the organization not falling apart.
Yeah.
You know, or like something outrageous happening, or like, okay, well, we all want to do this stuff now, and then it like a certain like, does the thing hold the structure or not?
Right.
And that the tension, and like, how do you manage that? Like, is it just luck, or is there enough like emotional literacy to balance? Like, those are like very interesting questions, and yeah.
All right, well, I guess that's where we'll leave it for today. Thank you to Sarrah for her great presentation. Thank you to Morgan and Jesse for their discussions, and see you next week. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye bye.